So this is Dick Termes. Today I'm going to talk to you about shading. Shading is something that seems to, well, people just don't think about it logically. And I like to overly think about the logic of it. So I hope you'll put up with me. But I think you'll learn some interesting things. I'm going to talk about the extreme shading. So things will pop right off the page and look like they're jumping right out in your hands. Um, this, I think, is a good way to talk about shading, to do it to the extreme. And then when you want to be more delicate with it, you just, I'll show you along the way what you can do to make it much more delicate. But I think to start with, you got to figure out how can you get the most punch out of an object when you're doing a drawing of it or a painting. It takes a certain kind of logic. I've done this before, but I'm going to repeat this because it's so important as to what creates a line in just a drawing line, or when you're trying to shade it, what actually creates a line in front of you. And one of the things is when you bend it around and you hide some of it behind you, like this, like a cylinder top, and you hide some of it behind you like this, it creates a line down the edge of that paper. So that actually is what creates a line. Now you can see that there, if you think shading on it, see how nice and light that is along that edge there? And then it changes to a darker shade as it goes around the corner. That shading is so nice and blended that you hardly even notice. Look up here and notice how dark it is here and how light it is in the background. In order to make that line show up, a line has to have a dark side and a light side. If you want to have it extremely popping out, see how I photographed, I have the t-shirt in the background that's quite dark, that pops that line pretty good. The darker that is, the more that line's going to pop out. That's what we're going to try and work with today, is in shading. Now, typically you'd use a pencil like this guy and a piece of paper to do this. I'm going to have to use the whiteboard, and so it won't give me the blends, the softness that a pencil would give you, but I don't have that ability here to show you unless I would draw right in front of you like that, which would be kind of hard for me. So I'm going to actually do it on the whiteboard. But so another type of line that you would get is a line that is a change of plane. So if you fold the paper, you can see that you're creating a line here. Look how light it is over here and how dark it is over here. If it isn't, if I tilt it into the light, what you do, you know, a lot of people say, well, I've seen it where the line doesn't hardly show. Yeah, but that's not how you want to draw or how you want to take photographs. You want stuff to show up and pop out. So you want, if you're in photography, you set up the lighting properly, like I'm doing here, and you get a very nice harsh line. If you're doing drawing, you do the same thing. Or if you're making it up out of your head, you actually think about, okay, where can I put the lighting on this drawing so that it pops it as much as it possibly can, and it looks normal to people. That's important too. Like if, for instance, if you were to put a light underneath my face, I would look very, very strange, you know, even stranger than I do. But if you put the light up above your head, that's the normal place that the sun is. That's the normal place for lighting in our house is. Very rarely do we shoot light from up and underneath. So we're used to the light coming from the top, and therefore we read those kinds of objects better than we do with the reversing the lighting. So just to play with this a little bit, we'll put a few more change of planes in it and see what happens. See how all of those lines, there's almost a cylindrical line down below there, but the lines all pop out one way or another. The lighting is doing the trick, okay? So you either have the lighting or you put the lighting in your head and put the lighting into your drawing when you're making it all up. That's the most important thing, I think. And like I said, we're going to go with high contrast, but the philosophy behind this is to get it to work with the most punch you possibly can. So when we start, if we were to start with a color like this for a line, like so, and we were going to say, and this is kind of light reddish, I'm going to go back with black now. And if a line shows up like this, it's showing up in shading because there's a dark side and a light side to it. You can do it on either side depending on what the whole composition is going to be doing. You want to keep it all consistent. But for instance, then we want to use shading on this. And remember, I'm using this pen, so I don't get to do the blending, but I'll talk to you about the blending, okay? So we start on one side. I'm gonna, here's the philosophy behind this whole way of drawing, is every line that you draw has to have a dark side and a light side. And I mean incredibly dark and incredibly white, as much as possible. That's what I mean by high contrast. That's what makes stuff jump off the page for you. So on one side of this, it's going to be shaded, and you always aim toward the line. You point your pencil toward the line that you're trying to work away from. You don't want to be pointing your edge this way and work away from it. It gives you a blurry sort of edge. You want nice sharp edges. A good sharp pencil is nice to work with. A good soft pencil. The softer the pencil, the darker you're going to get your picture. So this would be blended out very lightly here, all the way up and down. And one side of this line will be dark. One side of this line will be light. And it'll be very, very dark right up against the edge, and it'll fizzle. That's the idea, is let up on the pressure of your pencil as it goes out and let it fizzle away. And it can fizzle to where you don't even really notice it. Pretty soon, all you do is see that line. If you do it right, the first line I drew, you could have it disappear and nothing would happen because the shading will take over for the line. Okay, so that's the most important part of everything we're going to be doing today. But we'll be having objects instead of just a line. That'll become something, okay? So let me get rid of this and talk to you a little bit about the different shapes, because I go through these fundamental shapes because that's what the whole universe is made out of. And so I go through that. I'm going to start with the cube, and we had if you haven't seen it, you might want to go back and look at my contour surface lines, because I explain this in another whole session. But the cube that goes back in space, many different ways to draw it, but if you drew it this way, these lines are parallel here. These lines are parallel. And now that we have that back corner right there, you come across with the number 2 line. So those would be parallel to each other. And then the third set would be these sets that are going back in space. Those 3 should be all going parallel to each other. The next thing you have to think about when you after you've constructed the cube, which could turn into a house, could turn into all kinds of buildings that you see in a city, whatever, you know. But the next important part is, like I was talking to you, contour surface lines. And the lines that you shade with or do cross-hatching with for shading, the front runs parallel to number 2s and parallel to number 1s. That's that face. So if you do a stroke on that, try and do your strokes or your stroke in painting. If you're doing this as a painting, run the brush with those strokes. Up here, it's a number 3 line and a number 2 line. So your strokes and your shading with your pencil or your brush should go in those directions. This back plane here is number 1 lines, just like the front, but it also is number 3 lines. So that's the direction that your strokes should be. And if you actually put your strokes on there that way, it really makes it hold together. Okay, so now let's just erase these Now, having that knowledge now in your head, and see if we can do the proper shading on this. I think it's very important when you do shading on this that you think about the lighting, number one. That's the most important thing. This all can apply to photography also. When you're trying to get a good photograph, it's the same kind of thinking. First of all, you have to think about what is the normal way a cubical object, a house, or any kind of object that's made, like 60–70% of the objects around us, boxes and garbage cans and computers and sinks and refrigerators are all cubes, right? So this is not just a plain cube, it covers a lot of objects that you actually are confronted with when you're wanting to draw. And the number one thing is lighting. How do you light it? Now, if you're a photographer, you move your lighting around until you get it the way you want it. When drawing, you actually can put it wherever you want. But typically, light comes from the top. The sun is up there. Our lights in our house are up above us. So we're used to having light coming from up on top. Usually the best artistic angle is not straight down because it will wipe out a lot of things. But a slight angle like here, if the sun were up in here and then it shines down on this angle, it would make this be the whitest top. This would be maybe the darkest over here. So in other words, when you construct this, you go with the contour surface lines. This it has to be. I'm going to just keep it as simple as possible, not variations of darkness, just as simple as it can be. That means that this would be totally dark. When I get over here, I'm going to run that. Remember, these are the two contours of that side. So if we really shade it, and yours with the pencil, we'll be able to get this nice and smooth. Mine's going to be a little bit harsh. You'll have to put up with that part. Okay, so, but I want to point my pencil this way here. I want to point it that direction over here, and this direction over here, and this direction. Turn your sheet of paper. I don't get to turn this, but turn your sheet of paper so that your point of your pencil is always aiming at the edges that you're trying to shade, okay? And down here. So that's a really important technique to make sure that your composition comes out pretty good. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. Remember, you can, whenever you're doing this, if I get ahead of you, just pause me. Push the pause and so yours is going to be just a solid black front to this, okay? Now, when we have a solid black front like this, that means that this is black, this is white. If we want every line to show up properly, there's the 4 lines that we're dealing with. You want to have a dark side and a white side. A dark side here, up here, dark, and a white side here. Dark, white, dark, white. Now, we already have the white top because the sun's sitting the top. Okay, let's just play with that a little bit, because there's still 2 lines up here, actually 3 lines, that don't have a dark and a light side to it. So that means that point this way, although I'm not going to here, and put darks in the background behind this white side. Nice and crisp. I don't like, and this is just my own hang up, but I don't like smudging to get your shading. I like control the pencil to where you just let up the pressure and gradually get it to be lighter out here. Okay, so this is going to fade from very, very dark to very, very light, and almost and take your time. The best people that do this are the ones that take the most time. They have to have patience to be a good shader. And I've talked to students about this. You can get this done really fast. It doesn't mean it's going to be very good. So take your time to do it. So this line now is white here, dark on this side. White here, we need darks up here. Okay, so we're going to use the same kind of thing. Point your pencil towards that. And a lot of people say, yeah, but it ends up a big glob of dark up on the top there. Well, that's because you're not shading, blending it out. Let up the pressure and have it really fade out. If you do it right, no one will even notice that you put black behind that. But just think about it. The only way white will show up is if it has a really good dark background. So you've got to do it. If you're setting up a camera, make sure either put darks back here or put enough light on this to where the darks actually will show up. If you get this strong enough white, this will just have to be dark. That's just the way it works. Okay, now we've got two lines. We still have a line here that we have to deal with. If we want that to be incredibly light on the top, then we need to do some blending of darks. So start very, very dark here and blend it off very quickly. Because if you run the darks down here, so you're going to end up with a dark, and you can have a little bit of that. You can lose some of the lines on this with your shading, but you don't want to overly lose them, or you'll lose your object. So dark on this side, blending out very light. Okay, you could actually carry that over to here and let this be white back here too, and have the top, at least on the top part, be light. You got to leave it white here though, or you'll lose this line. If you bring these darks down in here, that line will have a dark, and that'll lose the line. That's no good. You can't do that. Okay, so so now you're going to be blending this off. You're going to bring this down in here. We want this to be white. We just won't let that be white too here, and dark in the background. So here you can come back with darks back here. And in the end, the idea is that every line shows up with a dark and a light background. I'm going to move this around the corner. And remember, you're doing it with pencil, so you have to let up the pressure. Let this turn into very, very light up in through here. But very quickly, you change the amount of pressure on your pencil and blend this out. A lot of people say, well, what about, like, you think of shadows with this too. If the sun is hitting here and it's hitting us, it'd probably cause great big shadows out here. I just ignore that concept, because you can also do your lighting to where that doesn't happen. And if you do, you end up seeing the object a lot more. So if the shadow is advantageous to you and you want shadows to be out here, but it's not absolutely necessary. I mean, people never notice, oh, there isn't, the light is shining here and I'm not getting a shadow over here where I'm supposed to be getting it. That's not anything that people think about. I mean, maybe if you were a FBI guy and you're trying to investigate a photograph to see what time of the day it was or something, then that becomes important. But to make an object jump off the page, it's not that important. All right, so I'm going to lighten this up a little bit, and that's the idea behind this. These shadows, like, you could actually bring this out and be dark out in here too, not have this just be kind of glommed. You don't want it to look like it's glommed onto the light sides. So sometimes to bring this across, bring it out here and have these darks connect together with a loose technique of a little bit darker here and blending out. You don't want it just to be a big dark circle out there either, or run it off the edge of the page out here. You can do all of that with your pieces, but that's the main idea. And remember, the idea is that every line has to have a dark light, dark light, dark light, or light dark, light dark, light dark, dark light, dark light, dark light. See how every line, look at every line and make sure that every part of it has a dark and a light line. Once in a while, when this creeps up in here and this comes down, you may lose a little piece of that line right there. And when this shadow comes across over to here, you may lose a little bit of that line with this moving across over here. But that's the basic idea of really good shading And if you take your time doing that, it'll just snap it. I'm going to shift to another shape like a cylinder, and see what the difference is when you're drawing curves rather than flat planes. So a cylinder we'll start with the contour of it, like we talked about before in my contour surface lines workshop. But one set of lines run like this. So copy this line up here, and this line are both the same. And so there's one set of lines that curve. And remember, it curves really in. So when these actually connect, they really should curve into that corner if you're putting strokes in here properly. You don't want it to just run off straight, or it won't look like it's curving like the cylinder should be. So the one set of lines come across like that, and then another set run this way, straight up and down. All right, that's the strokes that you use when you actually shade this either, and if it's pen and ink, that's the actual strokes that you'll see. You'll put them some places, and other places that you want it to be light, you won't put them. The top can either be, if you want it to be flat, all your strokes should run like this across it. That'll make it look like it's a flat top. If you want it to look like it's a hole, let's look at the difference. If just with the strokes that you make, if you put strokes straight up and down in this, that'll make it look like there's a hole in there. So, and especially once you really shade with that, get a whole bunch of these lines over here, if the light were up here, and less of them over on this side. And see, it'll make it really look like much more like a hole. So that's the basic idea. So let's do a little bit of thinking about the shading on this. Same rules as we talked about before. Make sure it's in the center of the page for you guys to look at. Okay, so here's the same idea. We need to figure out where's the best angle to light up. And once again, the light typically comes from up above. You don't want it to hit straight up above. You want everything you can do to make sure this object looks like very much like a cylinder and shows up and has lots of punch. Remember, we're going with high contrast. Later, you can be delicate and soften all of this stuff up. But it's the old idea that you have to know the rules before you can break them. And I think this is the solid rules, is to have a high contrast, high punch to it. So once again, I'm gonna put the light up above where it's much more normal. We'll have the sunlight or a light bulb up above and shining down on this direction. So that means the top is going to be white. Once again, we want every line to have dark and light contrast to it, okay? This is very, very good to practice. So if the light is hitting this way, this would be the light side. This would be white here. This would be dark over here. So I'm going to put darks along here. Remember, you point your pencil toward the edge that you want. I kind of have to cheat a little bit because it's too hard on this board to do that. But so I want it to be very, very dark along that edge to pop that edge out. And then fizzle it out very delicately out like this, and have your darks all of a sudden become lights out here. So and that brings out that one line. You've got one line done now. And it probably circles around. So probably at least this much we want this to be white. So over on this side, this will be our dark side of the cylinder. So we add darks here, all the way up, should be the same darkness all the way up and down the side, if it looks more like a cylinder. So if it's dark there, it's going to be dark here. And then gradually, as you move out, let your pencil lighten up, and you create the light side to it also. All right, you can use some of this stroke too when you do that. that help have it show up. But remember, if it gets light here, it should be the same all the way down to the bottom. All right. So that's the basic idea of a couple sides. We'll probably want to bring these darks down and circle them around and have that go from very dark along that edge. See how it's snapping that edge right there with the light? You can't have lights unless you have darks. You can't have darks unless you have lights. I mean, you don't know it's light or dark unless it has its opposite. So that's the basic idea. This could actually work its way up in here too and bring out that edge up on the top, because in order for that to be light like this, you have to have darks behind it. So every line, if you look at every line, it has to have darks behind it. Now, right now, see, it kind of looks like it's a glob. That's what taking your time, spreading it out here, having it gradually turn to lighter and lighter and lighter as it moves out. That's where the artists from the amateur come in, who will take the time to do that right. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, I wish I knew how to draw." I like you do, and you say you have to take the time to do it. If you want to do it right, you have to take time. Okay, so if this is going to be white here, we might have to add some darks, just a little bit of dark along this edge here, and shade, blend it off in a hurry so that that line will show up. We don't want to move it down too far or we wreck the flow of this too. So along this edge, remember, start really, really dark. Should be high contrast dark against light to really give it punch. And that's going to take care of that line. Okay, so now we need to bring these darks all the way across here to take care of the top of that. It might blend out a little quicker over here and a little less over here. It might go back in space a little bit. You can think about you know, what this is turning into. It actually could be an object of some kind. Maybe there's something back here that's actually a part of a building or something. So if you think about this being a building in the background, and this then could just be dark. The whole side of that could be dark. That would help pop this out. So you actually can put things around to make this stuff look proper. All right, so now we've got a light, dark. We're pretty much dark here, white here, dark there, white, 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 dark, dark, dark in the background. And even this part right here now has dark here and white there. And like I say, the secret is to get this stuff to blend out to where it doesn't look like it's crowding it. But now you can see, look how that pops out of there. I mean, I'm looking at the screen, back at the screen here, and seeing what you're seeing. And so all of these would be the white, dark, and just you want to look at your lines. And even if this disappeared right here, this line, it still looks pretty real. I mean, if this line if this line came around here, the shading, and you lost a little piece of that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have a little piece of the line missing. In fact, sometimes we in art actually lose the lines on purpose, keep simplicity in it. So, and you can even push it to the point to where just there's enough of it, enough lines there to make it show up. But that's another class when we get into that. Okay. So, all right, let's go to the sphere. The sphere is the last one that we play with, and it's a interesting study in itself. So we start with the circle of the sphere, and think about the lighting hitting it. It's not good to have it come right straight down on it. Always get it over to the side again. And the contour of this runs where this hits. There'd be one contour line that runs right straight across the sphere. Another one that would be partway up, and that would be like high noon on the Earth where that's hitting.
So the sun is out slightly and hitting that, and it creates contours that run like this on the sphere. Okay, and it runs all the way around, echoing from that spot. It's getting darker where we're at midnight back over here around the corner slightly. This set of lines actually come across like this. That's another set of the contours. This is the direction your stroke will have to go, okay, or like that. It swings around. This, if it came around the corner, it would come back around and fit somewhere back in there. It curve around to that. So these actually run around, they curve out like this. It's a straight line there, curve like that. It looks like our Earth globe, you know, the way they keep track of where you're located on the Earth. All right, so that's the basic strokes that you should use. So when you start to shade, you want to get down in here and shade this and leave this purely white up on the top, right? So that's the logic of this. I'm going to just erase this top. I'll just leave a few of these lines down below like that to help you know, even though you won't do it this way, you just keep the logic of it. So this is going to be purely dark along this edge of the line, and your strokes are going to run like that along this dark side of the sphere. And remember, this sphere is an apple, it's an orange, it's a pear, it's a piece of pottery. Very, very dark along this edge. Leave it white back here. Don't touch that background. Keep these strokes going like the contour shows. I'm going to kind of sketch this out a little bit so it fades a little bit more. Like that. Okay. And then you continue with that stroke. You can also run some of these lines the opposite way. Remember, yours is going to be with a pencil, you'll be pointing your pencil this direction when you create this. And you work your way up to where, and your strokes on yours, unless you're doing a pen and ink kind of thing, has to curve around like this to make this show up. All right, let's just now let's presume that we've added a whole bunch of nice smooth lines, nice and harsh along that edge. So that pops that whole bottom out. Okay. Looks like I have a little bit of a warp down on the bottom here. I'm going to swing this out a little bit more so it looks a little more round. Yeah, well, that's a little better. And so you have a white light. This has to be dark up here in order to make that show up. So you have to add darks in the background. Now watch how this gives it the punch. Remember, you're pointing your pencil that way. And remember to stop the video whenever you want to catch up a little bit and try and do this. And remember, I use these basic forms because that's what everything is made out of. So nice and dark here and fading out really nicely up here, letting up the pressure on your pencil as it comes out to the outside edge. And if you lose, and hide dark, the same kind of darkness here as you have back here. You know, a lot of people think, well, okay, it's background, so I don't have to be quite as dark. No, if you want the punch, you got to be the same kind of darkness back here as you have over on this side. And then these strokes really help too. As you come up, if anything does show, it's showing up in the proper contour of that object. That makes a great big difference when you're doing this. And remember that this stroke here can also be added to that and faded out as it comes up in there. But you can see that that really makes that sphere pop out. You know, it makes it look much more spherical. And make sure these are really curving around the edge, not running blunt. And very dark here, dark light here, dark up here, light there. and like we talked about before, get it
to really blend out and stuff. So that's kind of the gist of the shading. And you know, I'm looking to see if I'm forgetting anything. I think we've nailed it down. You have to take these objects, think of that as an apple or a head of a person. You know, maybe this is a person here with his nose down in here. And but it would be shaded the same way. I mean, so you have to apply the realism to this and see what you can turn it into. So anyway, that's the basis of this. Like I say, later you can make it much more delicate. You don't have to have all that punch every time, but sometimes you want to have stuff jump off the page. I have a tendency to pretty much always want it to jump off the page. So I use this a lot in my own work. And I hope this gives you an idea of how to do some shading. If this is in color, this could be, you know, all be in color too, but then you have to think of dark and lightness of the colors. You can make shades of color. You can have tints of color up here, shades of color, mixing either black, white with it, or just going toward the blues and the violets for the darks and going toward the yellows and the oranges toward the lights. That's what will make it really, really work. So I hope this helps you, and I hope we got a point across here. So good evening.